Forced to marry the Earl. But he knelt instead. The contract was already signed. The date was already set. And everyone in that drawing room believed Margaret Hale had no choice but to obey. Everyone except the Earl himself. She had expected coldness. She had expected commands. What she had never expected was for a man of his power to look at her as though she were the one holding all the cards. Margaret had not slept in 3 days. Her brother's debts had swallowed everything, the house in Wiltshire, her mother's jewellery, even the small inheritance their father had left behind. When Lord Ashford's solicitor arrived at her door with a proposal wrapped in legal language and quiet menace, she had read every word twice, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Marry the Earl of Ashford within the fortnight, or watch her brother go to debtor's prison before autumn. She chose her brother. She always had. The Earl's estate sat on the edge of the Derbyshire hills, vast and grey and magnificent in the way of things that do not need to try. Margaret arrived in a plain carriage with a single trunk and her chin raised as though she were not terrified down to her bones. Lord Edmund Ashford was waiting in the entrance hall. She had expected an old man, perhaps. Or a cruel one. Instead, he was tall and quietly watchful, with dark eyes that moved over her face not with possession but with something closer to calculation, and beneath that, something she could not yet name. "Miss Hale," he said. Not warmly. But not unkindly. "My lord," she replied. "Shall we dispense with pleasantries and discuss the terms?" A pause. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. "As you wish." The days that followed were not what she had braced herself for. Edmund did not parade her through society or treat her like a prize acquired. He gave her rooms of her own, full access to the library, and the strange, unsettling gift of his silence, which was somehow more companionable than conversation. She began to notice things against her will. The way he stood at the window each morning reading correspondence, tension written across his shoulders. The way he spoke gently to the older servants. The way he never once entered a room she was in without first knocking. She had expected a captor. She was beginning to suspect a man. "You did not have to agree," he said one evening, when they were alone by the fire with books open and neither of them reading. "My brother would have suffered," she replied. "Yes." He was quiet a moment. "I am sorry for that." She looked up sharply. "Are you?" His gaze met hers without flinching. "More than you know." She did not let herself dwell on what that meant. But that night she lay awake longer than she had in weeks, and not entirely from fear. It was Lady Forsyth who broke the fragile peace. She arrived with 3 other women of consequence at an afternoon gathering Margaret had not wished to attend, and she moved through the room like a woman carrying a secret she could barely contain. "How brave of you," she said to Margaret, sweetly, "to accept an arrangement born of desperation. Though I suppose pride is a luxury the indebted cannot afford." The room stilled. Margaret felt heat rise to her face, not shame, but fury, cold and clean. Before she could speak, Edmund appeared at her side. She had not even seen him cross the room. "Lady Forsyth," he said, his voice pleasant and absolutely unyielding. "I believe you were just leaving." The woman blinked. "I beg your pardon." Margaret, he continued, using her given name for the first time in front of anyone, was kind enough to agree to this marriage despite having every reason to refuse a man she barely knew. That is not desperation. That is courage. He looked back at Lady Forsyth with eyes that had gone very still. "I won't have it spoken of otherwise. Not in my house. Not anywhere." Lady Forsyth left. The room exhaled. Margaret could not speak for a long moment. When she finally turned to him, his expression had returned to its usual careful restraint, but his jaw was tight and his hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "I did." The letter arrived 2 weeks later. It was addressed to Edmund, but Margaret saw it by accident, left open on the writing desk when she came to return a book. She did not mean to read it. But her own name caught her eye, and then her brother's, and then the truth unraveled before her like thread pulled from a wound. Her brother's debts had not been as catastrophic as she'd been told. The solicitor had inflated them, on someone's instruction. Edmund's instruction, the letter implied. A transaction arranged so that Margaret would have no option but to accept. She sat down. She stood up. She walked to the window and stood there for a very long time while the hills went dark in the distance. When Edmund came to find her, he must have seen it in her face immediately, because he stopped in the doorway and said nothing, just waited, like a man who already knows the verdict. "You arranged this," she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by that. "Yes. You manufactured a crisis so I would be forced into this marriage." He did not look away. "I did." She had thought she was prepared for confirmation. She was not. "Why?" He crossed the room slowly and stopped several feet from her, and then, to her complete astonishment, he lowered himself to one knee. Not in ceremony. Not in performance. In something that looked very much like surrender. "Because I had seen you once," he said, "at your father's funeral, 3 years ago. You held your family together with nothing but your own will, and I thought, I have never thought anything so clearly in my life, that you were the most remarkable person I had ever witnessed." His voice dropped. "I handled it badly. I handled it wrongly. And I have no right to ask your forgiveness. But I would spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it, if you would allow me to try." The fire crackled in the silence. Margaret looked down at him, this powerful, foolish, quietly devoted man on his knee on the carpet, and felt something in her chest give way like ice at the end of a long winter. "Stand up," she said softly. He rose. "You will never manage my affairs without my knowledge again. Never. And you will tell me the truth. Whatever it costs you. Always." She reached out and took his hand, deliberately, with full choice, for the first time since any of this had begun. "Then," she said quietly, "we may discuss the rest." Outside, the Derbyshire hills had gone golden in the last of the evening light, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Margaret Hale, soon to be Margaret Ashford, felt something that was not duty, not obligation, not sacrifice. She felt entirely, completely free.